what must explicate the preponderance of the universe must be something which is independent and necessary. Why? Because, let's put it this way, everything that is composed is dependent. The universe is composed of parts. Therefore, the universe is dependent. Why is it dependent? It's dependent upon those very parts that it's composed of. By definition, by the way. By definition. This thing here, look at this, yeah?
Yeah.
We use it to, you know, praise God and all this.
Yeah.
There are 33 beads on this thing, yeah? Now, if we call this, what should we call this? We'll call this Series A, yeah? Now, this Series A with 33 beads, it depends on the 33 beads in order to be Series A, yeah? If I take these beads off, it no longer is Series A, because Series A is defined, it's definable by the beads.
Okay, but that's limited to your perspective and your...
Likewise, the universe is definable by its parts. The Earth, the solar system, the galaxy, and whatever. What we're saying is that anything which is made up of parts like this is dependent by definition, because it's dependent on its parts. And if it's dependent, it requires something outside of itself in order to bring it into being, and in order for it to depend on. For example, one more thing, let me just give you 2 or 3 examples, right? My phone here, okay, I got a phone, yeah? Can't be bothered, take it out and stuff, you know? It depends on what? Your phone depends on what?
The process of the screen, the touch.
Right, but what do you have to do every day or 2 with your phone? You have to charge it, right? So without charging it, it dies, right? But that charge that you put your phone in depends on something else. Some power plant that's generating it. And that power plant depends on something else. And it'll go back to the sun. And that sun depends on something else. And it'll go back to the universe and its constants and all these kind of things. The laws of nature. And so on. And I'm saying that if you keep going back in that manner, even if you don't go back antecedently like in that way, but if you keep asking the same question, what does it depend upon, then you have to end off with an unterminatable terminator. An unterminatable terminator, which in this case we believe is the independent that brings about everything else dependent into being. Let me tell you something else. So that's one example. Another example is, have you ever been to the sea? You've seen the sea, yeah? If you go to the sea, you've never seen the sea floor. You look at the sea and you realize that the water, because of its nature, its scientific nature, it needs to be situated somewhere. And the placeholder for this water is the floor, the sea floor. You've never seen the sea floor, and I've never seen the sea floor, but we assume and infer its existence because without the foundation, which is the sea floor, all of this water couldn't be situated anywhere. What I'm saying is the sea floor in this reality is actually dependent on something else, which is the geological landscape, the tectonic plates, whatever it may be, yeah? But reality itself must have an independent thing which everything else is situated and everything else stands upon. And if it doesn't have that, it's inexplicable. It's unintelligible. There is no way, that is impossible, I'm making the claim, without a necessary existence through which everything else must depend upon, and it depends upon nothing. I'm making the claim that absurdities would occur. That without such necessary existence, there are absurdities. That is the claim I'm making. And so, because if you think about necessity is the opposite of impossibility.
Okay. But here's the thing. Okay, so now you're applying objectivity into your belief system, because before you were applying subjectivity because we were talking about good and evil and stuff like that, but now you're applying objectivity. But now I need to ask, but why are you so certain about the dependency of different things? Because I mean, just because you say this is how it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it keeps going on, doesn't necessarily mean it is that way. Because again, you're not omniscient, you do not know. Despite as you said with the seafloor, that's a great example. You can look at the sea and assume a seafloor is there, but you will never actually know until you go. And you might actually go into the sea and realize, oh shit, there's no seafloor. And what would you do at that point when there is no seafloor?
No, but it's an analogy. I'm giving you an analogy that we are familiar with, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let me get that's what you call a cosmological analogy, that which has reference to the universe. But I can just as much give you a mathematical analogy, which works on a priori reasoning. So let me give you an example, right? I'm going to give it to you as a syllogism, okay? Any mathematical set, now let me make it clearer. Any non-empty mathematical set depends upon its members in order to exist. Set A, let's call it, for the sake of argument, whether it's finite or infinite, is a mathematical set. Therefore, set A depends upon its members in order to exist. What I'm saying is, this exact thing that I'm talking about can be reasoned on a priori mathematical grounds in as much the same way as it can be reasoned in a cosmological sense. In other words, I can give you examples in the world like I just gave you right now, examples of the ocean and so on. But I can also give you examples in mathematics. Now, if one has to, in order to disprove what I'm saying here, one has to show how it's explicable or otherwise conceivable that you can have a non-empty mathematical set that does not depend on its members in order to exist.
But, I mean, I can't remember the book, but there are a few people who have proven that mathematics in itself makes no sense, because relativism, the philosophy of relativism completely and utterly destroys everything.
I know what you're referring to. The person who is most famous for making this postulation was a man called Gödel, okay? And he had two theorems called incompleteness theorems, which he referred to. But you'll be surprised to know he was actually talking about set theory, in fact, as well. But Gödel made an ontological argument for God's existence. And the ontological argument that he made is not dissimilar from the one that I'm making right now. So the same man you're using as an authority is the same man who agrees with me, really, on what I am saying. Just like Leibniz agrees with me, just like Aristotle agrees with me, just like Avicenna agrees with me, just like Aquinas agrees with me. Now, who disagrees? There are only a few people in history worth their intellectual worth, with intellectual worth that come in the Enlightenment period, like Immanuel Kant, who said existence is not a predicate, or David Hume, who denied necessity and causation, or Bertrand Russell, famously, who argued for composition, fallacy of composition. He's not a professional philosopher.
Maybe I didn't make myself very clear. I'm not arguing against the existence of God. Again, like I've always said, like I said from the beginning, I'm not omniscient. So far as I'm concerned, anything could freaking exist. That tree could be a lion for all I know, because again, I'm not omniscient. I cannot objectively state things as fact.
But you keep saying you're not omniscient as if that's an argument. Listen, you're not omniscient, but you are making claims. Do you understand?
Yeah.
You are saying you're continuously making claims. You don't need to be omniscient to make truth.
No, but you need to be omniscient to objectively, well, paradoxically speaking, from a societal standpoint, which we always use, me and you use to justify things. From a societal standpoint, you need to be omniscient to objectify things.
No, you don't.
You do.
Well, 2 + 2 = 4. Is that true or false?
From a societal standpoint, that is true.
It's
because
from
society demands and needs objectivity to work. The same way religion needs objectivity to work.
To know the truth of some things. You do not need to know everything to know the truth of some things. Yeah? Yeah, so this idea that I'm not omniscient, is agnostics run away from discussion all the time by claiming ignorance. Agnostics, I'm not saying you are one, they might as well just change their name to ignorant ones. No, that's what it is. Because an agnostic doesn't know. All right, so if you don't know, what word do we use for that in English? It's ignorant. Sorry to say, you can call yourselves ignoramuses. You know, dumb, the dumb ones. You know, whatever. Like, these are not pejorative terms. They're actually synonyms for agnosticism. It's uncomfortable for some people to know that they're dumb or to ignorant, But just because they're ignorant on something, it doesn't mean everyone else has to be ignorant just like them. We, you know, I'm ignorant of many things. Special relativity doesn't mean just because I'm ignorant, it doesn't mean it's not true. This is called the fallacy of. Well, you've got two fallacies here.
You know how the universe started.
I've never made such a claim. I don't care about that. You can come and sit down after if you want to have a discussion. But let me finish with my friend first.
Yeah.
What I was saying was simply, no, I didn't make the claim about the universe, beginning of the universe or lack thereof. I'm not making a Ghazalian
Dependency, I think that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, so the beginning of the universe, or the eternality of it, or the eternality of a fabric of space, or the infinity of the multiverse, any of that stuff, I grant it all, no problem. It still does not solve what I am putting forward. All of that does not solve what I am putting forward.
I know something that might do. It's called no boundary condition by Stephen Hawking.
It won't do it. That won't do it.
He said, like, instead of having this thing where everything's dependent on something else, you can have a universe which is like no boundary condition.
Yes, but if there's only two options that one
Isn't that
has,
a paradox where it's like they exist between two points?
Possibly.
listen, there's only two exhaustive. If in an elimination argument, in a reductio argument, in whatever type of argument where in a logical disjuncture, you've only got two options. Either the universe is dependent or the universe is independent. There is absolutely no third option. And what I'm saying is, if you say it's dependent, if you say it's independent, then I say you've already admitted to the independence of something, which is exactly what I was trying to get you to do in the first place. Because if it's independent, that must mean everything relies upon it, and it relies upon nothing. It's eternally independent, it's necessarily independent. You're talking about God, but calling it the universe.
Yeah.
Right, now but the problem is, if the universe is, what I'm saying is the universe can't be independent. Why? Because anything that is made up of parts is dependent on those parts by definition in order to exist. Like, I'll say this again, these beads, 33 beads here. Let's call this bead A, yeah? If it is 32 beads, it no longer is the same thing. If it is one bead, it's something else now. It's become something else. In order for this to be what it is, it depends upon its constituent parts. That's it. The universe has made up of parts. Anything that is made out of parts is dependent. The universe is made out of parts. Therefore, the universe is dependent. And one can say, well, actually, that might not be the case, or whatever. I'll add another thing. No problem. Ontologically, and prioritize. How ontologically? Mathematically, yes. Because a mathematical set. What is a set? A set is, you've got three things in a set. Camera, one, and three. You can have a set of whatever number you can choose whatever set. Me and you, it's one set. Me and you is one set. Yeah? We call it set A, which is me and you in it. Okay, so in order for that set to exist, me and you have to exist first. So it presupposes my existence and your existence in order for the set to exist. Now I'm saying that thing presupposes an existence of something else depends on those. Can't be dependent. Now, independent and outside of the series in order to explicate the preponderance of everything else. And for there to be intelligibility, well, how can we intelligibly understand the state of affairs? We can only do so with the existence of the necessary thing. And what that necessary thing, by definition, is God. We call it God. You don't have to call it God. It's a necessary thing. Now, what have we already established about this necessary thing? That is eternal. Because if it's independent, there's no point at which it cannot be independent. It cannot be contingent at some time and independent. It has to be independent always. If it's like that, it also has to be what? Pre-eternal, post-eternal, which means eternal in all directions. It must be non-composite. In other words, it's made up of, just explained why, yeah? It must be, if you believe in causation, because I don't believe in causation. I'm putting an if here. Which, by the way, there's absurdities going on, but I don't want to. I want to keep absurd.
But that goes into infinite possibility, paradoxical.
If
nonsense.
you have infinite possibilities, it doesn't. You can have it. It's not a problem. It does not defy what I'm saying right now.
But causality does, because causality is, I swear, it's one thing happening after another thing.
Not always. You can have retro causality, in the quantum field and stuff. Something happens before, something happens. Effects that have to come. People talk about all. I'm not sure if you can have retro causality, but people speak of it, and that's why I'm saying that I'm leaving causality out of the picture for now, because it's a separate argument. I can argue for causality, but I'm not arguing for causality. I'm just arguing for dependence at the moment. What I'm saying is, if you look at that, so it must be that. Now the question is, what about will, choice? How do we prove that God is choosing things? It could have been another way. What do we mean by it could have been another way? I mean to say that it could have been, if it's way A, it could have been way B. For example, these beads could have been yellow. They could have been green. But 2 plus 2 equals 4 can never be anything but 4. If I put 2 plus 2 together, it can never be 4. And if it's dependent, it must mean that if it's dependent on something else. Because by definition, if it's dependent on itself, it will be independent. So two things. It could have been another way and it's dependent. Anything that could have been another way and is dependent implies that there was an external sorting agent. That this necessary being is now deciphering, making a decision, choice. It should be way A rather than way B. Like, for example, the person who created these beads decided that it would be brown. He could have or she could have decided it will be yellow. He could have or she could have decided it will be green. But a decision was made on the color of these beads. You could say, well, actually no decision was made. There's so many things in nature which things are the way they are because of something else. But even if that is the case, then you have the regress problem that we talked about. So you have to have a terminatable thing. But the universe is one way rather than another. Now someone might be a determinist and say, well, actually, if everything is like that because of an antecedent causal chain, I say, even that's no problem. I agree. But it's determined in conjunction with the determiner, which is the necessary existence. But in abstraction, it cannot be said to be necessary, because anything necessary can never be out of existence. There was a time the Quran says, وَقَدْ خَلَقَتُكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا, that we had created you before and you were nothing before that. There was a time I never existed, and there was a time you never existed, which means we can't be necessary by definition, because something necessary is eternally necessary, it's eternally independent. Which means that in abstraction, if you take that thing in abstraction, there's no quality within me of necessity. Because if there was a quality of necessity within me, I could never cease to be. There would be no time in which Mohammed Hijab, the learned one, would have knowledge. There would be no time where Mohammed Hijab would have not been in existence. I would have been an eternal soul. Or not even eternal soul, eternal body and soul. Pre-eternal and post-eternal. Now what I'm saying is that that's not the case, which is I'm contingent. I am dependent. So this is evidence that there is an independent entity that gave rise to everything else in existence, and that everything else in existence depends upon it. And if you don't have that, you can't have anything in existence. We would not be having a conversation right now. One question that if you ever have time to think about in your home, it's just one question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Think about that for a second. How can that even be explicable? The only way it can be explicable is if that there was something else which was always there, which is necessary, it could not be any other way, that brought rise to that. No other explanation is possible. I'm not even saying is allowable or is intelligible. I'm saying it's even possible. There's no other explanation. Any other explanation fails to answer this question. Why is there something rather than nothing? No other explanation on the earth can answer that. There must be this independent thing which everything depends upon for its existence. And that keeps things running. And that has made choices about the universe. And those choices in the fact that the universe is way A rather than way B. Another question one may want to ask is, why is the universe uniform, regular and stable? Three things the universe is. The laws of nature they have to be uniform, regular and stable. Or someone will say black hole or quantum field. These people don't understand anything, because regularity, stability and uniformity are not something discoverable by science.
You don't like quantum physics, do you?
No, it's not that.
No.
It's not this. I'm saying that quantum physics itself, in order for someone to do quantum physics, they have to assume uniformity, regularity and stability of science. It's an assumption of science, it's not something which is discoverable by science. What do I mean by that? Let me give you an example, bro. If I measure the temperature of boiling water, what will it be? 100 degrees. Well, unless I'm misunderstood, the situation. But I don't think the learned one will misunderstand. 100 degrees. Okay, now imagine if I was a scientist, yeah? And I thought to myself, if I measure water today, it'll be 100 degrees. Yeah. But if I measure it tomorrow, it'll be minus 100 degrees. And if I measure it the day after, it'll be minus 1,000 degrees. And if I measure it the day after, it'll be a billion degrees. The fact that I expect as a scientist for there to be the same results today, yesterday, tomorrow and the day after means I assume that science will operate in the same regular and stable way today as it did yesterday and tomorrow as it did today. Thusly, one may say that stability, regularity and uniformity are not discoverable by science, but that they are assumptions of science. So when people make the fine-tuning argument and they say, well, there's three options, either it's necessity, chance, or design. I say this is a false thing, because it's not that you have all these constants, the electromagnetic constant and so on, and that there are these three options. I'm saying you have uniformity, stability and regularity, and that those three things, uniformity, regularity and stability, you can't even do quantum physics without them, without the assumption of them. So if you assume them before you do quantum physics, the question, from whence did they come from? Why is there regularity, stability and uniformity of nature? How is it explicable that there is uniformity, stability and regularity of nature? There's only really two options. Option one, that they're explicable by a preponder of some sorts, an uncaused cause, an independent one, the necessary existence, or that they are self-explicable, meaning that they're necessary themselves. But the category of facts is not, the category of existence is, the category of fact, which in this case, these are necessary facts about the universe, it presupposes the category of existence. You can't have 2 + 2 = 4 as a fact before it being existing in some conceptual, universal, whatever realm. Thusly, one may also say you cannot have regularity, stability and uniformity of nature unless you have some existence that explicates that particular reality. I say that's the necessary existence, without which nothing can be explained. So we can explain, the necessary existence explains everything. It doesn't explain some things. In fact, the thesis, the correct thesis of the necessary existence explains everything. It explains why there is something rather than nothing. It explains why there is regularity, stability and uniformity of nature. It explains why the universe is not ceasing to exist right now. Why it's perpetually existing. Because it's dependent upon something else which is in perpetuality existing. And thus, I might say, the atheistic option is impossible. An atheist must be ignorant. Either he is deceiving himself or he is ignorant. There's no third option. The other option may be that he's compoundedly ignorant, so much so that he doesn't know that he's ignorant, that he's convinced himself that he's speaking truth. Tell me what explanation the atheist has for why there is something rather than nothing.
Okay, so most of the time, as you said before, but you don't necessarily like the argument, is relativism. That's the main argument for, because again, relativism kind of cuts through everything. It kind of cuts through logic, it cuts through objectivity, it cuts through any real sense, because it opposes it completely. But again, I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, look at the world we live in, 2 + 2, as you said, it equals 4, it won't equal anything else. But relativism is the main argument that they use.
What relativism are you talking about?
Pure relativism, in the sense of, so I know there's moral relativism, and most people use that, but I mean relativism in its purest form, in the sense of there are no rules, no up and down, everything applies. Essentially a paradox in itself. Everything is just independent. Again, my argument about the human beings, about infinite potential of them being both infinitely good and infinitely bad.
Get me the biggest moral relativist, cultural relativist, skeptic in the world. And let me ask him one question, or you can ask him or her this question yourself. Or make this statement and tell me if they disagree with it. There is no doubt that there is existence. Can anyone refute the statement?
Okay, but I mean, relativism would just argue what is the definition of existence and what the hell is existence.
Being.
Okay, but what is being? You say you are being, right?
Something.
Okay, but then they would ask, what is something? Again, definitions is the problem.
There is no doubt there is something.
Okay, but you have to define something in the first place. And something, but you make an objective aspect of something, but the thing is, relativists would say something is subjective, and then something can become anything.
I don't know of a single relativist in the literature worth his philosophical stock, merit, that would embarrass themselves enough to refute the statement. You know why? Because the statement, there's no doubt that there's existence, is irrefutable. Anyone who tries to refute it will presuppose existence, because you cannot argue against the existence of existence without having being in existence.
Hence why I say it's a paradox, and hence why I say I am not omniscient and that I do not know anything.
You cannot have paradoxes or contradictions without existence.
Again, but this is why I say an atheist would argue relativism.
No. They wouldn't, because they would be making a fool out of themselves. If they say life is a contradiction, life is a paradox.
But they would though, because you said
Let
God.
them say it, but a paradox is something. It's not nothing. It's you can say it's meaningless, but you saying it is something.
A paradox is both something and nothing at the same time. It's just independent between the two. Hence why it's a paradox.
If it's something that cannot come into existence, then it's an impossibility, like a squared circle.
Yeah, I know, but that's why I'm saying atheists would argue relativism.
So we're
because
looking
you have given a just argument for why God exists. Therefore, for an atheist to argue God doesn't exist, he has to use relativism.
Let me ask
because
you,
objectively speaking,
how can an atheist argue with me if they want to throw logic out the window? What tools will you use? If you're saying life is a paradox and that impossibilities are possible, how can you now argue with me when you have basically said we are not going to be using logic? It's like saying this: a child goes into his maths class with a teacher and says, I don't accept any of the mathematical formulas you're talking about. Okay, and then he starts arguing, no, Pythagoras should be this way, or in fact the trigonometry should be done that way. You can't make any argument after you've nullified your tools for it. It's like shooting without a gun. It's like you're telling me this: the atheist will shoot you in the head without a gun. I say it's impossible for the atheist to shoot me in the head without a gun, because if there's no gun, he can't shoot me. Likewise, if he gets rid of his own weaponry, in this case, which is the rules of logic and so on, he can't do anything to me. If you don't have logic, you have nothing. You can't make any arguments.
But you argue they would though, because again, you've given a just argument, an objective argument of why God exists.
Okay,
so therefore,
I want you to tell me what's wrong with the argument.
No, I don't. Again, I don't really. The argument works.
Do you accept the argument?
I accept the argument.
Good. Forget about what the atheist.
But at the same time, I don't, because again, it's weird.
Okay. Look.
Because my original question was if God exists.
Can I be a bit straightforward and tell you? We're ethnic minorities. me and you are ethnic minorities, yeah? Atheists will say things. Usually they'll say things from the West. Richard Dawkins, this person, that person. They can say all kinds of things. Now what the atheist says is irrelevant if what they are saying does not have any analytic or demonstrative proof. I'm not saying we have this, but because we're ethnic minorities, we think maybe these atheists have something, they're clever people, maybe they're saying something clever. I'm telling you that it doesn't matter. We shouldn't think just because these are white men wearing lab coats or because they're, Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, let them say what they want. Honestly, they can say whatever they want. If they can't prove it, they can embarrass themselves for all we care. They've come out of vogue now anyway, these atheists, because their arguments have not even kept up with the pace of the philosophical inquiry. Richard Dawkins has been humiliated by Michael Roos, another atheist, who's a philosopher. He calls him like a schoolboy. He says there's a schoolboy. He says, going around saying who created God. This is embarrassing the atheists. Michael Roos said that. So it doesn't matter what the atheists say, because most of them, they will just say things to try and avoid the incontrovertible fact. It's an incontrovertible fact, which is that in order for there to be anything in existence, there has to be a necessary existence. There cannot be a world in which there's only possible existences or dependent things, depending upon dependent things ad infinitum. That's impossible. That's inexplicable. And so I say, let's put aside what these atheists say. Let's now be sincere about this. Do we really believe? Let's go straight to basics. Could something come from nothing?
Well, again, this is why the whole causality argument comes into play, because arguably you can argue because certain things happen in a certain way. Again, as you said, stability with the universe always happens in that way. No, but if we are to believe there is an infinite potential for causality, then you could also argue then yes, it might happen at a very low statistical probability, but it might actually happen. That something comes from nothing.
So tell me how. So you say it might happen. Give me a scenario where something can come out of nothing, where it's conceivable.
The Big Bang. Most people say the Big Bang comes from nothing.
The Big Bang is not nothing, though, is it? Not everyone says that. Everyone says
before it comes from nothing, though, because it just happens. It just appeared.
No physics textbook in the world will say it.
What's one other thing? When they say something can happen out of nothing, like you, Azar. I say, for example, if I tell you the dialysis machine, now it's a huge machine, right? And the function it does, only very small thing, like for kidney, which is about the size of fava bean. The fava bean,
we have it.
And also it looks like physically, it looks like fava bean. The whole fraction of the whole dialysis is made by the one machine. So if I tell you that the dialysis machine come out of nowhere, and I go in the hospital, it's like a spontaneous generation like that. Will people think I'm the same person? So why the same fraction done by the little thing, kidney, the fake atheists or whatever, think it's coming out of nothing without any.
No, but let's forget this. Let's just go straight to basics. If it's conceivable that something can come from nothing, surely there should be some kind of demonstration where that could be the case. Is there any demonstration you can think of, whether it's cosmological, mathematical, or otherwise, where you can show me how 0 plus 0 can equal anything other than 0?
No, but
right, so nothing can come from nothing.
Yeah, but then you could just argue maybe someone hasn't lived long enough to eventually see that, or maybe we haven't so far to see that within the universe, because obviously we're trapped within a very spatial bubble.
Listen, 2 plus 2 equals 4. It equaled that before I was born, before you were born, and it will continue equaling that a million years from now. If we live for eternity, it would still be the same thing. Now, 0 plus 0 is the same thing. It will always equal 0. It's never changing.
But see, thing is, this argument eventually comes down to objectivity versus subjectivity, and with that, there is no satisfactory answer. It just loops, because the idiot will always be like, subjectivity, anything can be anything, yada yada yada. And again, society, who favors objectivity and logic, will always argue 2 plus 2 equals 4. And it just continues in a loop as a paradox, and it never really gets anywhere. There's no really satisfactory answer.
What you're saying to me,
But I do agree with what you say. I do take the objective answer. I'm just playing the devil's advocate of the subjective.
We don't need to play the devil's advocate because let me tell you something, right? If you read the greatest minds from the time of Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, all the way through the Enlightenment, all the way through the Renaissance, Descartes, Leibniz, you know, in the Western tradition, in the Eastern tradition, in the medieval tradition, in the Christian tradition, the Jewish Maimonides, Aquinas, Duns Scotus, and so on. This argument that something comes from nothing is not made. It's not. There must be a reason why people don't make this argument. This fool Lawrence Krauss, who wrote a book, Something from Nothing, himself when he was confronted about it, he said, look, you know, what is nothing? It's a quantum field, a black hole or something. So what that nothing is the absence of something. He doesn't mean that. He doesn't mean that in his book. So because he doesn't mean that, he was even rejected by his own atheist friends. If there was stock in the idea that something can come from nothing, it would be more vehemently made by professional philosophers and analytic thinkers throughout the ages. There is no stock in it. It's mathematically impossible, it's cosmologically impossible, and it is ontologically impossible. Something from nothing, nothing comes. Nothing can come from nothing. The universe couldn't have come from nothing. And the universe could not have created itself. Because it would have to exist and not exist at the same time.
But this is why atheists say, who created gods?
Now, that's what I'm saying. If we keep saying that, who created the creator, then we're going to have an infinite regress of some sorts. And we're going to have not just an infinite regress of dependent things or causal things, but you're going to have an infinite regress. And even if you say, oh, infinity can exist in the real world, the series of infinite regress itself is dependent because it's composed of parts. So it has to have something outside of it which is independent and explicates it. In this case, it's the necessary existence. There's no... the conclusion is inescapable, actually. Trust me. But think about it. Okay, think about it. I don't want to pressure you anymore. Just think about our discussions. 2 questions I want you to think about. Why is there something rather than nothing? What is the best reason, or what is the best explanation for why there's something rather than nothing?
But then you have to define... Okay, no, sorry.
Right. Got it. Yeah? Alright. Alright, so we'll call it a day, man. Thanks so much, brother.
No
if you
problem.
need anything, let me know, inshallah. We'll be here, and if not, you go to Ali, and Ali can get in contact and stuff. Well, it's a pleasure. You're a very clever person, you know, you're very analytic, you're very critical, but I want you to think about what we talked about. You know you've been going to the gym, right? Thank you for playing devil's advocate.